Eddie Half Moon awoke as he did on most days, shivering and cursing obscenities to no one in particular, whilst ensconced in a camouflage sleeping bag under a bridge nearby the intersection of Trent and Hamilton in Spokane, Washington, USA. The frigid November morn was most unkind to him. The other transients had already moved on in the very early morning, when it was still twilight. The remnants of their encampment stood prominently in the meager dawn sunlight. Cardboard, beds, empty alcohol containers, spent hand warmers, and needle paraphernalia. There was a glut of knotted up shoelaces under here from all the junkies tying off, not just the meth heads, but the heroin addicts as well as the individual here and there that fancied shooting pills on the off day. Eddie used to get up and walk a couple of miles across the city to get to the one church that served breakfast almost every morning. But last week he was banned for a month after he got himself into a heated physical altercation with another homeless native. That was one thing about Eddie, he was always starting shit, and he loved doing it honestly. He was a real drama queen when you get right down to it. Ed had always been since he was a child, a middle child at that, always sort of ignored and brushed to the side because he wasn't especially big or smart or cute like his brothers and sisters. No, so Eddie became the bad one. That got him plenty of attention for sure by many, and consequentially, authority figures, starting with teachers before moving on to law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and judges. Fuck 'em all was Eddie's motto. He wasn't a great role model for his people, though was always ready to step out to represent his race as a whole, especially during heated arguments of discriminatory nature. Despite his energy and enthusiasm, it was wanton, and his general moral bankruptcy failed to sway the opinions of the white population in general. Eddie occasionally took that to heart, and when he felt passion for something, he was quite dangerous. Like after a certain therapist called Eddie out during a court-mandated anger management session a couple years ago. "I'll crash that son of a bitch's Beamer into the fucking river," he had threatened. Not surprisingly, that night, the fire department was dragging a newly leased two-door luxury sedan out of the Spokane River. Eddie did 90 days for that little episode, and he never did finish anger management. Eddie got up and took a piss on some poorly wrought graffiti on the underside of the bridge. "Fuck you, Bobby B. Fuck you in your ass," Eddie thought as he pissed on the tall black letters. There was a trickle of moisture coming down from one of the cracks on the concrete. That's what Eddie focused on as he finished up and climbed out of the faded green auto mechanic jumpsuit he had slept in. Transient pro tip: if you're sleeping in the goddamn dirt, a jumpsuit will protect your clothes from the outside elements. What to do? What to do today? He nonchalantly said to himself. What's Eddie going to do today? He removed some rudimentary shaving equipment from his black backpack, a cheap yellow disposable razor, shaving cream in a sandwich bag, and an aluminum can of squirt, messily torn in half with many jagged edges. He unscrewed the cap of one of the several bottles in his bag and put some cherry limeade seltzer in the half can. "I like the way the bubbles feel on my face," is what he would reply with if you inquired as to what exactly he was doing with the seltzer. He shaved quietly without relish. With each stroke, he looked over his shoulder this way and that. He did not particularly care to be seen doing such a thing, shaving in the Spokane River next to a pile of feces and a well-used forlorn sock. Eddie did not need to shave per se, having rather thin and sparsely placed facial hair to begin with, but he did enjoy the smooth feel of his face afterwards. He washed his face off with more seltzer and hid his bedding under some leaves. Eddie wasn't about to be like a lot of the guys walking around town with a rolled-up sleeping bag strapped to the top of his backpack. No, that gave away too much. He'd lose his mystique if he wasn't careful. As if he knew anyone that actually cared, or if they did care, paid attention to details such as that. Eddie took a slug from a liter bottle of Old Crow bourbon, one of the other bottles in his backpack. He rinsed and spit with it. Then he took another hit of The Crow, which was also one of Eddie's all-time favorite movies, this time holding it down. He put the bottle away. Then he opened a very tiny plastic jar that once held hashish and removed a clear, moist piece of crumpled plastic. What was once a generic fentanyl 25 microgram per hour patch. There wasn't much of the gel left inside, but it was still enough to make him feel kind of good after about 20 long minutes. He counted himself lucky he knew an old fart that had tossed him the spent patches after they'd been worn a few days. It was still creepy knowing what he held in his mouth contained bits and pieces of dead old man's skin with it. Not from a dead old man, but an old man's dead skin. Thanks, Skip. You're the shit. Once he was feeling appropriately good enough, Eddie made the steep climb upwards away from the riverbank. He heard from above, immediately recognizing the guttural music belonging to none other than the Spitter, a fellow who did little else but spit repeatedly and angrily over and over all day and night. And people spit a lot in this city. To spit so much that the other street people differentiated him as the Spitter was truly an achievement few others outside from myself would care to recognize. Eddie covered his hair with his hands as he emerged from beneath the bridge. Luckily, he was out of the Spitter's range of fire. You could tell the Spitter was not a meth head, otherwise his mouth would be so dry all the time. He'd simply be spitting dust, and I honestly cannot tell if that would be much of an improvement or not. An internal decision was made to venture towards the safe way, so Eddie could charge up his phone. He wasn't about to tackle the day with a dead phone. No, that would not do. Not at all. The walk was not short. It took 45 minutes for Eddie to make it to the store, past the college, past a number of bars and liquor stores that were not open for the day as of yet. Once inside the grocery store, Eddie bought 2 energy drinks and sat down at one of the tables by the deli. He plugged his phone in and mixed a little Old Crow into one of the open cans. Then he withdrew a tattered O. Henry paperback he stole from The Mission and began reading a short story. There was a small child riding what appeared to be a homeless man on the cover. Eddie found that story in particular to be especially disconcerting. It was not long before Eddie recognized someone familiar to him. She was a meth head, obviously, not pretty, no life left in her eyes, which despite that factor still remained wide open like those of a dead goldfish floating upside down in a tank. She was accompanied by an extraordinarily suspicious-looking African-American fellow whose fresh gear contrasted sharply with the rags that adorned Caroline's matchstick body. If he wasn't her drug dealer, I'll eat my hat for your enjoyment. Hey, Caroline, said Eddie as he pointed at her. You still got my fucking sweatpants. And she did. Eddie let her use them the night before last, and she'd never given them back. What pants? The junkie asked in all honesty. God damn it, woman. You know what pants I'm talking about. My pants. The fucking pair I let you put on the other night. The ones you're still wearing right now. A meth addict, when cornered, will usually feign ignorance at all costs. Evidence suggesting otherwise may mean nothing to them. They will usually lie to cover up their original terrible lie and will layer their lies so thickly that one would rather simply give up than to try to cut holes in their poorly constructed logical fallacies. Yes, they just stand there looking dumb, saying, "What? And I don't know what you're talking about," until the accuser becomes blue in the face, collapses, and dies from exhaustion. A brilliant tactic reserved for only the most highly regarded military geniuses of all time. Sarcasm alert. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Ed. These is my pants. The hell they are. Check the tag. My name's written on it. No. Check the fucking tag. No. That was when the black fellow attempted to step in. In his experience, usually folks would back right down from him, especially the white folks who was scared of the black man around these parts. Eddie was not so easily swayed. No, he wouldn't budge an inch, and he didn't. Yes. The dope dealer took one step in and took one step out. As to him, it seemed that the agitated native was ready to bite his fucking hand off at the wrist. So, since this development was making so much sense to begin with, Caroline took off a shoe and threw it at Eddie. You want pants? These shoes are brand new. They're worth $40. Here, you fucker. Eddie raised his arms and deflected the sneaker projectile that was, in all obviousness, not brand new. The other shoe caught him in the face, though, and that was enough for Eddie. He rapidly collected his things and got out of there before shit got any more fucked up than it already was. Crazy goddamn tweaker slut, said Evie as he basically ran out of the exit while the cashiers all turned sequentially, following his departure with raised eyebrows and the collective murmurs of, "What was that Injun doing fighting with that white woman?" It took all of Eddie's concentrated energy to not violently and suddenly retaliate, what he liked to call bringing the hellfire. It seemed that some of that anger management therapy may have helped after all. A couple years prior to this, he would have wrecked them both in the worst way possible, in such a way that it would have inevitably ended with charges ranging from disturbing the peace, to destruction of property, to, well, the list would have went on and on and on. Now that's what I call progress. Eddie hoped that the rest of his day would go better than his morning, though his gut feeling told him otherwise. What the fuck am I gonna do now? He asked himself as he stood outside the grocery store until a half-blind drunk slammed into the back of him without so much as an "Excuse me, sir." Eddie pushed past the pathetic drunk and made the several-mile trek to the library. Once there, he waited until it opened and fell asleep at a table all the way up in the back on the third floor, doing what he could do to kill as much time as possible in anticipation of the coming evening. Friday night in Spokane. I'll be sure to get myself into some trouble. I wonder what Pete's doing. I wonder how he's doing with that cook today, thought Eddie as he dozed off face down into an extremely thick Norman Mailer tome about Gary Gilmore. It sure made for a good pillow. Thank you very much. This is Alexander A. Manzoni signing off.